I was waiting for an introduction, but never mind. Good evening, everybody. My name is Brenna Zachariah, and I'm the community educator for the Community Coalition Against Human Trafficking. We're also known as Grow Free Tennessee. But tonight we'll be talking about a very popular topic we've been hearing about lately. And honestly, this month it's National Human Trafficking Awareness Month, so it's the perfect time to talk about it. But this information might be brainy. We want everyone to be more comfortable about talking about trafficking. And if this is old information, I want to hear from you guys. If you all can write in the chat box, and Carlene will help tag team with me. This is all kind of new to me, so please be patient. We are kind of rolling with the punches, but no matter what, we really want to, we hope this training inspires everybody, encourages everybody to reach out and ask questions. And if we can go ahead and go to the next slide. If we can go to the next slide, please. Carlene. Perfect. Thank you. So I think it's really important that everyone understands what is human trafficking, right? We hear the word. There's so many things that we've heard and seen on social media, but I guess the most pervasive myth that we hear is that it often involves some sort of kidnapping or physically forcing someone into a situation. And folks, there are plenty of myths and misconceptions about human trafficking, what it is in general, who are the victims, who are the traffickers, who are the purchasers. And again, social media is such a powerful tool. We're using it right now to spread awareness, but also social media can be a tool that's, gives some inaccuracy, right? So with human trafficking, lots of times when we're doing these trainings in person, I ask the audience, when you hear human trafficking, what comes to your mind? And lots of times we hear folks saying, it's the movie Taken, or it's that stranger danger post that I've seen on social media where someone was walking out of a Target parking lot and they saw this white van in the corner. And that's human trafficking, right? They put it all in caps in the bottom. And side note, if you've ever been in a dangerous situation like that, I want to validate your feelings. That's terrifying. I cannot imagine being in that situation. Could that be a dangerous situation? Absolutely. Is that what we see commonly when it comes to trafficking situations? No. It's actually the complete opposite. It's something that is hard for us all to believe, that it's not stranger danger, that traffickers actually have a relationship with their victims. They know their victims. Um, they build a relationship with their victims. So it's important to know that anyone is susceptible of being trafficked. So our basic definition of human trafficking, it involves the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain some type of labor or commercial sex act. And this is a major crime industry generating $32 billion in revenue. This is a very, unfortunately, flourishing crime. Some people call it a violation of human rights, excuse me. And there are definitely certain high risk populations that are at risk for being trafficked. We'll kind of go through that in the next couple of slides, but I just definitely wanted us to get a good definition and understanding of what is human trafficking. There are different types of human trafficking that we see here in Tennessee, but we'll talk about what we see most commonly in this area. But if we can go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Carlene's going to be my helper tonight. So talking about what is sex trafficking, right? That's the most common type of human trafficking, folks, here in Tennessee, especially here in East Tennessee. So your basic definition is that force, fraud, or coercion to make someone engage in a commercial sex act. And it's not all black and white. This is a very unique type of victimization. And for not only direct service folks, but for anyone that we do these trainings, we really try to emphasize that it's never going to naturally, well, it is very rarely going to naturally present itself to us, right? Meaning you're not going to have someone saying, help, help, I'm being sex trafficked. They might come up to you and ask for help for another reason, right? But lots of times they don't acknowledge or understand that they're in a very dangerous situation. And one of the most common types of sex trafficking we see here is familial trafficking, right? That's when a family member is acting as the trafficker. And again, that goes back to the whole misconception that people think it's that person popping out of the bush that's about to sex traffic you. This person is related to the victim. Most of the time, what we've seen is the trafficker is the mom. And that's again something very hard for us to wrap our mind around is how can a mother be the exploiter? The person is that is studying this victim's vulnerability and exploiting them. Um, with familial trafficking, what we've noticed is that when mom is a trafficker, lots of times she was trafficked when she was younger, right? It's multi-generational. It kind of goes down this line of generations. And what happens is all becomes very normalized. Very common here in East Tennessee with those geographically isolated areas. The other most common type of sex trafficking we see is intimate partner trafficking, right? That's, it's not uncommon for us to see a client that's in a relationship with this trafficker. They have a child with their trafficker, and it's very similar. The way this relationship has all begun, excuse me. It's kind of like the domestic violence relationship, right? That power and control. There's an actual relationship happening, but this abuser is studying this victim's personality. What are their weaknesses? Where are their vulnerabilities? How do I fill in those voids to where this person becomes dependent on me? So it's a very unique, dynamic and complex relationship that these individuals have with their trafficker if they are in an intimate partner relationship or trafficking situation. So we always tell folks that if someone's in a situation, to be understanding, to listen, and we even tell our direct service folks, our social workers, our case managers to foster trust, right? And we'll talk about why that's the most important aspect when it comes to this person getting out of that situation. If we can go to the next slide. Uh, we'll very briefly talk about labor trafficking in this presentation. If you have more questions, I'd be more than happy to answer afterwards. Labor trafficking does happen here in Tennessee. Is it as prevalent and common? No, but it's still, we're seeing it in those counties with factories, agricultural work. So that definition is that forced fraud or coercion used to make an individual work or provide services for little or no pay. And demographic wise, it's happening to US citizens, but more often we're seeing it happening to folks who are coming outside the US to the US for a better job opportunity, which creates this extra layer of fear of why they're not going to ask for help, why they're scared to even tell somebody else. Trafficker uses that force, fraud, or coercion to threaten them, to withhold their documentation, to physically abuse them. And we're seeing it happening in domestic work, agricultural work, nail salons. We always do these trainings in Scott County, the farms. Even in Pigeon Forge and Gatlinburg, those touristy areas. So it's really important that everyone across the board, we train our hotel managers, our truck stop managers. The labor trafficking, unfortunately, can happen in East Tennessee. And we talk about kids. Kids could be paid the least and exploited the most. And because of their legal incapacity, not really understanding, is this minimum wage? Am I getting, is this taxes? Or I don't even understand some of it most of the time. But they often don't have access to resources. So kids, unfortunately, are at the top of the list when it comes to vulnerable populations. If we can go to the next slide. I wanted to kind of go back to the terms force, fraud, and coercion because that can kind of sound confusing. But to understand from a victim's perspective how challenging it is to get out of that situation, right? Obviously, force traffickers will beat individuals, threaten them, sometimes restrain. We try to stay away from those images of someone in a cage or chained up or zip ties, maybe metaphorically, because again, this is not how we see someone being trafficked. Again, that trafficker comes in, gets to know this person, grooms them, gaslights them. So we want to kind of stay away from that image. But lots of times, traffickers will use that force to scare that person. Fraud, false promises. If you do this, I'll do that. There's a lot of manipulation, brainwashing. I hate saying, but that's reality. And the coercion we've had where traffickers have filed a false police report on somebody. They want to get this individual on law enforcement's bad side. That law enforcement looks at them in a certain way. So it's important to understand how challenging it is for that person to leave that situation. They might feel like it's all a lost cause. And I kind of wanted to elaborate on that term commercial act, and that's pulled from the definition of sex trafficking. What does that mean? What does a commercial act mean? And we have to have a broad understanding. That could, what is being exchanged most of the time? Money. but it could also be other things. It could be drugs, it could be shelter, it could be a job opportunity, it could be health insurance, which again makes it really hard for us to catch that act happening right then and there. Most of us are thinking, all right, if I see sex trafficking, I'll call it out right then and there. But it's not the typical, oh, here's $20 to have sex with somebody. You might have where mom sells her kid at the beginning of the month and rent has gone down $300 at the end of the month. So we have to make sure that everyone across the board is trained and understands how challenging it is to catch this happening. Doesn't mean we can't catch it, but we have to dig. We have to ask questions and investigate. We can go to the next slide. I don't want us to get stuck on these numbers because does everything go reported? Obviously not, but this gives us a good baseline to understand how big of an issue this is on an international and national level. And the scary statistic is on average, 2 children are trafficked every minute. Kids in foster care are really at the top of the list when it comes to vulnerable populations. And throughout this training, I'll be using pronouns he and him as trafficker, but we know that anyone could be a trafficker. Mom is a good example in that familial trafficking situation, and that anyone could be trafficked. But most of the time, we're seeing that victims are women and young girls. We have had young boys that we have worked with at our agency and male adults. So trafficking is like cancer; it knows no boundaries. But if you have folks that say, "Oh, it's only happening overseas," um, show them these numbers. Tell them, no, it's happening here. It's happening here in our neighborhoods. Another scary statistic is back in 2018, the US, along with Mexico and the Philippines, were ranked one of the worst places for trafficking. A first world country going through trafficking, right? So again, folks are not aware of how bad of an issue it is here. It is most definitely a public health issue that we have to address. And more than 300,000 kiddos are at risk for exploitation because of those vulnerabilities. We can go to the next slide. This is a map taken from Polaris Project. If you all are familiar with that agency, they are also in charge of the National Human Trafficking Hotline. So this is where they're getting their calls from, right? Uh, and with Polaris Project, as I mentioned, they are in charge of the hotline. They also provide services for victims. They provide trainings as well. So if you're wanting to do more trainings, they have some free online trainings that you can sign up for. But they're really all about creating long-term solutions when it comes to this issue. So they're like the godfather for us. So this is showing from 2017 where they're getting their calls from, right? So either someone's in a dangerous situation or someone is seeing something suspicious and making that call. So we're seeing what in LA, Florida, New York, but check out Tennessee, kind of middle northeast Tennessee. It's happening in this area. And this is from 2017. If we can go to the next slide, 2018. There is an increase of calls. And looking at this map, we see the increase in calls made by the hotline. But does this mean that it's becoming a bigger issue? Absolutely. This also could mean that folks are becoming more aware of trafficking and are doing the right thing and making the call. But no matter what, this is not giving us the full scope of this issue. And this is not going to go away. Again, if we're silent, we're complicit and we cannot be silent about this. So I just wanted to give you all an idea of how bad this is happening nationally. We can go to the next slide. Again, I don't want us to get stuck on these numbers because we don't have traffickers putting this on their tax return, right? But this kind of gives us an idea of reported cases. So back in 2011, TBI had conducted a report across all counties in Tennessee asking, is human trafficking happening in your area? And some counties were like, nope, we don't have it. It's not happening in this area. And there were some counties that said, yeah, we're actually seeing some suspicious activity. So back then, counties with the highest prevalence of trafficking were Shelby, Davison, Knox, and Coffee County, right? Fast forward to 2019, human trafficking was reported in every single county, right? All 95 counties in Tennessee, there was some sort of trafficking situation. And for this to be the second largest crime in Tennessee, these numbers look pretty low. And this is the perfect crime. It's hard to spot, and traffickers know their victims, right? And they play this role of being the nice person, the hero, the savior. So we hope that we have folks that are watching this training right now that want to be advocates on every level, whether it's locally in your community, law enforcement, legislative. There are plenty of opportunities that you can give back and help the community advocate for these individuals because, again, it's not talked about enough. And I'm so glad that you all called me to do this training because I'm passionate about social justice and advocating for these individuals that folks oftentimes victim blame. So I'm not going to go on that tangent. But on a good note, when it comes to Tennessee, Tennessee is actually doing a wonderful job when it comes to the best response to assessing law enforcement approaches, legislation, and survivor services. So go Vols, we're doing great when it comes to that. If we can go to the next slide. So we know it's happening. We know that it's happening here in Tennessee. Who's at risk? Who do we need to be on the lookout for, right? So I said it could happen to anybody, but there's certain populations that are more at risk. And it goes all to vulnerabilities. Who are the most vulnerable populations that we see here in Tennessee? And what makes somebody vulnerable? The biggest thing that we see is poverty, right? Poverty creates despair, and when someone's in a pickle and they can't afford something, extremely vulnerable, and traffickers target poor and marginalized communities to offer this person some sort of false opportunity to improve their circumstances, and that person is more likely to take that risk to improve their circumstances or to provide for their kiddos. So that's a big vulnerability we see here in Tennessee. Another one is addiction, right? Not before the pandemic, we were going through an opioid epidemic here in Tennessee, and traffickers use substance dependency and addiction to keep control of that trafficked individual. Lots of times, our clients that we work with were saying that they were not even using a substance before they met their trafficker. Because that's one thing that we hear with victim blaming. Oh, they were being stupid. They were using drugs. Then they knew what they were doing. No, that trafficker intentionally got this person addicted to this drug because that's a great way to blackmail them. If you don't do this, you don't get your drugs. And we know that if someone withdraws quickly, it can be lethal. Another vulnerability that we are struggling to address with mental health issues, right? People with mental health issues are going to face a variety of challenges, including isolation, a diminished capacity to give consent, to know what consent is, are honestly just getting the vibe that someone has ill intentions and wants to harm and manipulate them. Unfortunately, traffickers are very skilled at detecting these vulnerabilities and manipulating them to their advantage. So the common aspect of these populations that we see on the slide, which is are a few populations, a few groups that I put on here for you guys, is that they're marginalized from society. It's very indicative of this predatory nature. So kids in the foster care and group homes, unfortunately, are at the top of the list for a reason. Traffickers know that if these kids disappear off the grid, they're less likely to be checked on, especially if they have kind of burned bridges throughout their process with the state and are constantly running away. And a scary statistic is within 48 hours of a kid running away that's in the system, 1 out of 3 will be approached by a trafficker. They know who they want to approach, someone who's broken, someone who wants to be seen, loved, heard. Um, Anyone with a previous history of physical or sexual abuse. Excuse me. Research shows that victims of violence early in their life are likely to experience that violence later on in life. Our LGBTQ community, LGBTQ youth, unfortunately, are up to 5 times more likely to be victims of trafficking than a heterosexual peer, right? Especially here in the South, our minorities. Again, all these populations are marginalized. And if you're in the social work or human services field, this is who you're working with all the time. So all these individuals are at risk of being exploited by traffickers. And again, anyone with a vulnerability can be exploited. We all have vulnerabilities at the end of the day, right? They're not, as a parent, I say someone who's homeless and has absolutely no resources. Um, and again, that misconception that people say, "Oh, they're just putting themselves in a stupid situation. They knew what they were asking for," is not the case. Next slide, please. So we always have people asking us, "Oh, why don't they just leave? If someone tried to sell me the first time, I would have slapped them, and there's no way I would have allowed it to happen." And it's frustrating. I get it. I don't have that much field experience as I'm doing my trainings, but you hear these stories and you're like, "Oh my God, like I would fight back. I'd do something." And there's many reasons why it might be challenging for that person to leave that situation. Um, Let's talk about again vulnerabilities. That person might have experienced some sort of traumatic stress in their life, unable to pay for rent, they've been furloughed, maybe they are using some sort of substance, maybe they have the death of a loved one, maybe they were previously sexually assaulted by another partner. And this is when traffickers look for that opportune moment, right, to come in that person's life, fill in that void, right? And this is where they look like the sweetest person. Oh my gosh, he's so nice. He's paying for her rent this month, and he teaches pee-wee soccer on weekends, and he goes to church with us. It's scary, and I hope I'm not paranoid you guys after this training, but traffickers look like us. They talk like us. They don't dress a certain way. Sometimes they do, but lots of times they live with it. They're in our area, And I always get grossed out when I go on Facebook and I'm seeing these like local stings by TBI, and you see who these traffickers and even the purchasers, the term they use is called a John, who these Johns are. People that we've interacted with like when we were younger. I remember one time I saw an old assistant teacher in my elementary school. So they traffickers and purchasers could be anybody, and again, I hope I'm not paranoid you guys. um but that's the reality. That person might not identify that they're being trafficked. Going back to the familial trafficking profile, familial trafficking, I told you all about, where the mom is a trafficker. Is that 9-year-old going to acknowledge that she's being sex trafficked? We had a survivor tell us when she was first trafficked, when she was a minor, that her grandfather came up to her and gave her a pat on the shoulder and said, "I heard you're helping us. You're helping pay for things this month. Good job, kiddo. Thanks for helping us out." Of course, she's not going to acknowledge or understand that she's being exploited. This is all wrong. It's been normalized in the house. So they're not going to identify. And let's be honest, who wants to identify as being the victim? We really try to stray away from using that term victim, but who wants to be identified as a victim of trafficking, right? They're in denial lots of times. Um, that person might have been convinced to lie because of that force, fraud, or coercion. Traffickers have convinced them to lie for their own safety. They're stuck in that cycle for many reasons, and that's where they're being threatened and blackmailed. I'll beat you. I'll beat your sister. I know where your family lives. I have these videos of you. I'll traffic our kid. I'll file a false police report on you. They really take away any sort of resources, isolate them from anybody, making it all feel like a lost cause, that they're stuck in that situation. Um, that person might feel loyal to the trafficker. I think this by far is the most challenging thing that when we're working with our clients, is the relationship that these individuals have with their traffickers. We talk a lot about trauma bonds and Stockholm syndrome. And I kind of always give this example for us to understand is that, do you all know somebody that is clearly in a toxic relationship with somebody, right? It's very apparent, evident, and they choose to stay with that person. And you're on the sidelines thinking, hello, this person is obviously a terrible person. Why are you staying with them? And unfortunately, sometimes that person in that toxic relationship genuinely cannot acknowledge that toxicity. And that's what happens with these individuals that are being exploited and victimized. With those trauma bonds, it can happen emotionally, physically, mentally, psychologically. It's these ups and downs of the relationship, right? Things will be really great. Then there comes that tension. Then there comes that moment where he exploits her or he slaps her. And then he says, "I'll promise I never do it again. I love you so much. Please don't leave me," right? So then the longer she stays in this relationship, the more challenging it is to leave. We know with domestic violent relationships, it takes on average someone 7 to 8 times to cut off ties. Trafficking, it's 10 to 14 times, right? And they have this very unique, complex relationship with their trafficker. Um, and not only can this happen in like a relationship, but it can happen between family members, coworkers, and friends. So that abuser, that trafficker will condition this person into thinking that this is all normal, that everyone else goes through the exact same thing. With Stockholm syndrome, we use that quite often, that term quite often. Many psychologists think that, and medical professionals think that Stockholm syndrome is actually a coping mechanism for the brain. So, for those that might not understand what Stockholm syndrome is, it's basically where this person, this trafficked individual or the victim, sympathizes towards their abuser. right? And they'll develop positive feelings towards their abuser and then negative feelings towards anyone that's trying to help them, any authority figure, which we always tell the social workers, do not be surprised if these individuals, when they first meet you, bark back, yell at you, don't want your help. That is what trafficker has taught them. No one else wants to help you. I am your safety. I am your home, right? I'm your shelter. Um, and again, this is the brain. We know that the brain changes with trauma. Absolutely. And lots of times the brain in the situation is in a haze, it's in a freeze mode. It's trying to calm itself down, thinking this is all normal, it's all okay. So these are a couple reasons why it might be challenging for someone to leave the situation. We always tell people to, look at it from their perspective, be patient, be resilient. And lastly, that person may need shelter immediately and has no other resource, no support. They obviously know that they're not in the best situation, and they think it is what it is. And we've heard them say that before. It is what it is. So it's heartbreaking to see how they process this and how they think that this is the reality and that the world is bad and no one has good intentions. But it doesn't mean that we can't, walk them through these steps and get them to where they are empowering themselves or healing. We can go to the next slide. So we know it's happening. We know that there are certain populations at risk. How in the world is this thriving, right? And I hate saying this, but traffickers are smart business people. They see that there's a demand, unfortunately, and this would not be thriving if there was no demand. It's incredibly profitable with a low risk of getting caught. So let's say I'm a bad person, right? I'm gonna do some bad things, and I'm gonna be selling me an AK-47, right? It's in the front seat of my car. And if I get pulled over, I'm probably going to go to jail, right? The risk of getting caught is pretty big. Now, the reward, if I somehow don't get caught, is fairly decent off of that one product. Let's say that I'm driving my car and I'm selling me a couple bags of weed, right? The risk of getting caught is not as bad because I can conceal it, put it in a brown bag, I can toss it out the window. And the reward is a little bit higher, right? Because I have more than one item. But when it comes to selling a human being, what's the risk of getting caught? If this person is sitting next to me, they're not in a cage, they're not chained up, they're not zip tied. Let's say this is my boyfriend, right? Or my daughter. Let's say my daughter. She's sitting in the front seat. She's not yelling help, begging on the window. She's just sitting. We're listening to music, we're singing songs together. Is anyone going to think that she's a victim? Absolutely not. And unfortunately, folks, that is why this is the perfect crime. And the reward, how many times could you sell somebody? A lot of times, an infinite amount of times. Unfortunately, reports are showing that victims, usually adults, victims are sold between 20 and 40 times a day, 6 to 7 days a week. This is a thriving crime. A study back in 2010 found that a pimp held a daily quota for his 4 victims, and he again obviously was not paying his taxes on what he was making. So this pimp profited roughly around over $600,000 off of these 4 women that were making him $500 each day, 6 to 7 days a week, no vacation, no holiday, right? Um, and I don't want to go on this tangent because I want to make sure that we stay on time for questions and whatnot. But there would be no money made if there was no demand. And if we really want to address how do we end human trafficking, how do we win this fight, we have to look at it from upstream. And the upstream issue is that we have people that want to buy individuals and kids for sex and think it's okay. If you all like reading research, there is an article which gives you a perspective from a different population, the purchasers, the Johns. So it's called A Great Hobby, and you can look it up online. The article is free for you to read, and it was done by the Chicago Alliance Against Sexual Exploitation. And basically, this nonprofit put out an ad in the newspaper saying, "Hey, we're doing research about purchasers of sex, and if you want to fill out this ad anonymously or this survey for free, you'll get a $50 gift card from us," which I find ironic. Anyways, so they fill out this survey, and the responses were gross. So you need some self-care after reading this article. But the way that most of these people were men, The way these men looked at what they were doing, nothing wrong. That these women were consenting to it, and it's like buying a piece of pizza, and she probably is defective. The comments are disgusting, but it gives you a side of research that we don't often get, right? We don't have purchasers saying, "Oh yeah, I have sex with minors all the time." So it gives you perspective, but it also shows, and this is my personal opinion, how our social norm and our culture has indirectly blessed this behavior. So if we really want to talk about how do we eradicate this and prevent this from happening and find upstream solutions, we have to talk about the demand side. And I don't think anyone is born bad. I think that these individuals have mental health issues that we have to discuss and that we have to normalize that people have mental health issues, and we're not going to judge them, but we want to make sure that we help them and prevent them from harming themselves or harming others. So that is my tangent when it comes to why is it thriving. But unfortunately, we don't have a surplus of people that are like, yeah, please traffic me. We have the demand side that we have to address. Next slide. So, who are the traffickers? We obviously know that traffickers could be anybody, right? It's not just exclusive to pimps and gang members, and that most of the time, traffickers target people that they already know, or they have developed a relationship with, right? Not an overnight relationship, but they know this person. Our director of youth services wrote a blog right when COVID came out because we had all these people asking us, well, how are you going to catch these traffickers? How are you going to help find these individuals that have been taken or run off with the mask mandate? And again, it's not, I mean, masks are pain, but it is what it is. We're 2 years into it. It's not the mask that made it hard for us to help these individuals, right? Or to find them. It's the relationship that these traffickers have cultivated with these individuals, making it easy for them and their actions to fly under the radar. Again, because no one's going to assume, anytime a parent's walking with their kid, oh, he's sex trafficking her, right? No one's going to make that assumption. That's just something that we've not. It's hard for us to process, right? It's uncomfortable for us to say, but traffickers, unfortunately, could be anybody. Next slide. So, what are some red flags that we need to be on the lookout for? And folks, I always tell our direct service folks or just our community advocates that are watching right now, please go with your gut feeling. You might have someone that has all these red flags. It is a constellation of red flags. You're like, something is up, right? Go with your gut feeling. And you might have someone that shows one little indicator. You're like, maybe they're just being a kid, they're just being moody, they're going through something, but you still have a gut feeling. Go with your gut feeling. We want to make sure that we're approaching it in a safe way for you and for them and a smart way. But red flags that we've seen is that sometimes this person, or most of the time, this person has injuries, that they have bruising, kind of healing at various stages around their wrist, their arm, their neck. Um, Lots of times they've become even more socially isolated from family and friends. Traffickers choose someone who usually already is isolated and isolates them even more. This person might not have ID or documents on them, and I'm not meaning only undocumented, individuals coming from outside the states to visit. I'm also talking about just not having your ID on you. I can't see you guys, but how many of you all have lost your ID before? I have, and it sucks, right? You have to go to the DMV, you have to put all this, extra paperwork, pay for it, transportation. Well, what if you don't have all that? Let's say your trafficker takes your ID away from you, right? And you're trying to get away and you want to apply for housing or stay the night at the Salvation Army. You have to have an ID for that. And if you want to replace your ID, you have to have your social security card. Well, how do you get your social security card if you don't have your, I mean, it's frustrating for these individuals because we've had a survivor stay with us for months, and it took us 7 months to replace their ID because they didn't have that supporting documentation. So unfortunately, I hate saying it, it's a smart tactic for a trafficker to take away a couple pieces of paper from that person, making it really challenging for them to survive without their trafficker. Um, this person might be inappropriately dressed. Let's say it's winter time, they're wearing summer attire, they're in the same outfit for a long period of time, they've developed some poor hygiene. Maybe they say that they're actually older than what they are. So, like a 16-year-old saying that she just turned 18, lying about her age. Maybe this person has more than one prepaid phone, signs of drug and alcohol abuse. Um, lack of control of money finances, if they're married to their trafficker, dating a trafficker, and evidence of controlling and dominating relationships. I'll give you all a quick story since we have time. We had done a training with some medical professionals at a local hospital in the ER. We were telling them how it's really important that medical professionals make that connection, even though it's a 5-minute conversation, to make that connection, because lots of times trafficked individuals go to the ER. They're in some sort of immediate need or assistance going to the hospital. But this doctor had a young girl, she was in maybe 18, 19 years old, come in with her boyfriend every other month for an STD check. And he thought she's just being, young and dumb. She's 18 years old, 18, 19 years old. And she'd always ask, I need an STD check. And he said, well, if your partner's here and you're both sexually active, let's go ahead and get him tested, right? Every time she would test positive and every time he test negative. And it didn't dawn on him until after doing this training that he was looking at the partner's response and body language. The boyfriend was very calm and he said, oh, okay, well, if you can just give us our antibiotics, we'll be out of your way. Thanks, doc. Folks, what is a normal response if your partner has an STD and you don't? You're freaking out, right? You're like, who are you sleeping with? Like, you're not calm and collected as this young man was. So that was kind of his first indicator. And then he also noticed the body language, that she looked uncomfortable, that he was answering those questions on her behalf. It just didn't seem right. He just had this weird feeling, especially after this training. So indeed, he was able to separate them, ask her if she felt comfortable and safe, if she needed some resources, and he gave her our number. And she stayed at our safe house, and she was unfortunately being trafficked by her partner. So these trainings do work. And again, go with your gut feeling, but understand that this person might not identify that they're being trafficked. And we don't have to like yell at them saying, you're being victimized, but understand they might not want to acknowledge that or be in denial about it. They might be scared because they're thinking, I'm going to go to jail for this. They might, because of the legal consequences. And again, they're going to be emotionally invested in this person, their trafficker. So they're not going to have a clear picture of that situation. And for us to be patient, to be resilient, and to foster trust. We can go to the next slide. So this is our case management. This is what we work with. We're working with our clients at our safe house. I'm not going to go too much into it, but physical complications, we'll see where there's some scarring, fractures that have not been attended to, if they've not gone to the ER because they're scared they're going to, catch attention. So usually the first 2 weeks staying in our safe house is doctor visits, constant doctor visits. Malnourishment. Traffickers will use food as blackmail. If you don't make your quota, you don't get your meal for the day. They will make sure that these individuals are not sleeping enough. So I have like sleep apnea, and if I don't sleep well, I am cranky. I'm not focusing. I'm not critically analyzing things. And again, unfortunately, it's a smart tactic of our traffickers to make sure that these individuals are not sleeping enough, so they're not critically assessing with the situation around them. They're exhausted. They're just kind of in a haze. So the first 2 weeks, again, doctor visits, sleeping, eating, recovering, physically recovering, right? Sexual complications, STIs, STDs, bladder infections, it takes a toll on the body. Multiple abortions, pelvic inflammatory disease as well. So the physical and sexual complications in time go away, right? But the psychological, and I hate saying this, I wish I could tell you, oh, when clients stay with us, it's like they were never trafficked before. And that is not the reality, right? We know the psychological effects trauma has on the brain, that PTSD, that depression, that anxiety, those trauma bonds. We'll see this before, during, and after, right? So we always tell our case managers, our social workers, it's not uncommon to see this. It's not uncommon if you have someone who was depressed and doesn't want to follow the case management, because that is what the brain is telling itself. Everything sucks. I can't trust this person. This person is probably seeing if I'm going to snitch on my trafficker. I met a client, and she thought I was working with a trafficker, and that I was going to see if she was going to snitch on the trafficker. Suicide attempts, memory loss. Again, the brain kind of goes into fight, flight, or freeze when it comes to trauma. And lots of times the brain will go into that freeze mode. Everything is a haze. things are not in a linear order. Things are kind of scattered. So when we're asking them questions, they can't remember. They can't remember things in that right timeline, and that gets very frustrating for them. They're thinking, I remember it, but I can't give you the specifics. There's that memory loss. So again, this is our case management, and it could take months, it could take years. But what's really important is that we help walk them through this process. We help educating them. You're not going crazy. This is, in fact, because of the trauma you've been exposed to. Being patient, fostering that trust, understanding that sometimes they go back to their trafficker because that is the brain reenacting the trauma, right? That is something the brain does to kind of master that trauma, and it's almost become addicted to trauma that they'll go back to their trafficker or a new trafficker or start using a substance again. And that's a stage of change for any of our public health friends out there um, that's part of the stage of change, the stages of change, and that we don't want to necessarily celebrate when someone relapses, but we have to understand it's not uncommon, and that we have to be back at that moment of pre-contemplation when that person thinks, okay, there's an agency, I know that they'll help me out. And when they come back to us, that's a great thing because that means that they trust us. And for these individuals, they trust very little people, given what they've gone through. So this unfortunately is just, it looks like not a lot, but that's our case management with our individuals. We can go to the next slide. Other unique medical issues. Excuse me. Again, I'm not going to get too much into the nitty gritty, but we see that it takes a toll on their health, chronic health complications. They'll just have random aches. Their body is aching for nothing has happened, but their body's aching from that stress, that anxiety that's been pent up in their body for years and years. Where they develop asthma, dental problems, where they've been punched by a trafficker or the purchaser, and have developed an infection or using some sort of substance, and tattoos and branding. Now, we see this sometimes on our clients where their traffickers will, convince them or force them into getting a tattoo. And it's usually a vulgar message in a very visible area, right? Like this one, for example, F you, pay me on the neck. Trafficker knows that if someone sees that, they're gonna be like, "Yikes, I don't wanna be around this person." That's kind of an aggressive thing to put on your neck. He knows that if he dresses her like a prostitute, she talks like a prostitute, she has tattoos like a prostitute, is anyone gonna be thinking, "Oh my gosh, she's being sex trafficked?" They're gonna think, "She's asking for this. She knows what she's wanting." Um, so again, we have to understand all that. We've seen where traffickers put a barcode on somebody. Well, what do we put on barcodes, guys? Products, right? He is showing her that she's nothing more than a product. He has dehumanized her, right? Just with that barcode. And that is what lots of times we see with that sex trafficking is dehumanizing that person over and over and over again. And it takes a toll on them, and they have this loss of self and purpose. So again, that's continuation of our case management. We can go to the next slide. I'll read this quote, and this is pulled from one of our clients' stories with their permission. We had to, keep it anonymous, but I'll read this for you guys. When my trafficker continuously tells me that this is the only way that I can survive and that my only value is in sex work and I'm given no other options to experience something different, then I begin to believe him. When my trafficker breaks me down mentally and emotionally, then builds me back up as my sole source of support, then I rely on him to tell me who I am, what I'm worth, what my purpose is. I begin to lose my own sense of self and take on the reality that he has shaped in order to avoid negative repercussions or further harm or abuse. I learn to survive in this chaotic, unsafe world by relying on my trafficker and silencing my own identity and instincts. I may even take on a new persona to separate myself from my original identity before trafficking. And over time, I forget who I was before. And this is the reality of a trafficked individual. It's heartbreaking. Again, I don't have that much contact with trafficked individuals. I'm not in the direct service field, but to see what this constant dehumanization and trauma does to somebody psychologically, emotionally, how they have this, they think everything's a transactional relationship, that we do something nice for them and they're like, what do I gotta do for this? We're like, nothing. We just want to help you. To see what it does to somebody, what trafficking does to somebody psychologically is terrible. And we want folks to understand that um, it could happen to any one of us. It happened to our kids, our family members, our friends. Again, it knows no boundaries. And we hear our direct service folks saying, well, we have to have something very specific, a therapy for trafficked individuals. There's not this golden book that says, here's how to work with a trafficked individual. It's just a really intense case management and a really resilient case manager that is patient, that is resilient, that understands that this person, it might be hard for this person to accept help from us. Lots of times, these individuals do not feel worthy of help from us. They think that they're dirty. They think that everyone has judged them, that the life I mean, this feeling of hopelessness and helplessness, it's it sucks. It breaks my heart. So, I just want everyone to understand that how it's challenging for even after they've come to see us at our safe house and we work with them. Sometimes they don't feel like they deserve our help and they don't know who they are anymore. We can go to the next slide. I don't know if this video will play on this program. Can we try? And if not, I'll skip over it. Nope, it's not going to. All right, that's fine. So this is and you all can find this video on YouTube. I watched this right before I started grad school. I went to ETSU for any ETSU people here. But this basically talks about finding upstream solutions to any public health issue. And this, for sure, is a public health issue. And some of you may never come into contact with someone who's being trafficked, right? But every single one of us knows somebody vulnerable, right? And trafficking is a public health issue that affects families, communities, and generations across the world. And I can't emphasize enough the phrase knowledge is power when it comes to our initiative at our agency. And we recognize that when we're educating everybody about trafficking and everyone understands what it is, we're helping with the counter trafficking movement, right? If we have more conversations about this, you might have somebody, a friend of a friend that's a victim that says, I feel comfortable to come out and ask for help because beforehand they felt judged, they felt stigmatized. So we want this to become that ripple to wave effect. And we have to look at it not only from um, the criminal justice and social service perspective, but we also have to incorporate preventative strategies based off of certain counties. We have to understand that someone's social and economical situation determines if they're more at risk of being trafficked. That's the reality, unfortunately. So, how do we find an upstream solution? If we live in a county that has a higher minority group or rate, or higher homeless population in certain areas, how do we help these individuals? How do we help get them off the street? Get them, support, resources, mentors, shelter, whatever we can to find upstream solutions, because as long as there are vulnerable populations, trafficking will always exist because traffickers will find that vulnerable person. So if we can work upstream, find an upstream solution to this, we can end trafficking. So that's my public health tangent. We can go past the next slide and past that one as well. So where do we start? Let's have a conversation about trafficking. After this training, go tell your friends, your coworkers. I just listened to this crazy woman talk for an hour about trafficking, and I think that we should do another training. We have 13 trainings. I think the first 4 would be related for you guys, but we have our trainings are grant funded. So sign up. We can do it online again. Um, Foster safe homes and neighborhoods and identifying those vulnerabilities. Back to what I was saying, finding those upstream solutions. We had someone talking about the foster kids. If you can you be a foster parent? If you can't be a foster parent, be respite for a foster parent. Be a mentor for these after school programs where these kids need mentors in their life. There's just so many ways that we can get. And I'm not saying give back to our agency. I mean, I'm not going to say no to it, but if you can give back to any nonprofit that needs help, advocating your money, your voice, your time, your experience, your social media, share all this stuff. I'm a social media person, so when you're liking and you're commenting, it helps with everyone's algorithm so that more people are seeing these posts and sharing and donating. There's plenty of ways that you can give back and making sure that lastly we end any business profits from trafficking related stuff. So if there's A lot of stuff that we get here from the US is from overseas. And there's always some suspicious companies that have some labor trafficking involved. It's very hard for me to tell you guys, all right, don't buy anything that has anything suspicious, because that's me challenging, right? So I challenge you guys that whenever you're buying someone a birthday present, to make sure that item has no sort of trafficking suspicious behavior. So those are just ways that you can start off in being part of the counter trafficking movement. We can go to the next slide. This is what we did last year or 2 years ago. Oh, it's 2022. I forgot what year we're in, guys. This is from 2020. So we had 226 reports on our personal hotline. I can tell you, last year 300 reports. So we've definitely seen an increase in our reports. We served 157 individuals in 2020. In 2021, we served almost 200 individuals. We trained 4,600 individuals in 2020. In 2021, we served around 3,800. The numbers kind of dropped because everyone's kind of going back to their normal life and they're not having to sit on their computer the whole time. But these are our numbers from last year. And again, these numbers are unfortunately growing. I didn't mention in the training, but almost 3/4 of our clientele are minors. Almost 3/4 of our clients are minors, and 90% of our referrals for minors comes in from DCS. So kids, again, in the state that are work with or through the state, are more at risk for being trafficked. We go to the next slide. So everyone pull out their phone and give us a follow on our Facebook and our Instagram. I'm telling you, this is a great way to help join the counter trafficking movement just by following us, liking our stuff, sharing our content, spreading the knowledge. So our Facebook name is the Community Coalition Against Human Trafficking. You can also just type in CCHT. And then our social media account is the CCHT. There's our username in the little thumb graphic you can check out. Ways to donate your money, your time, your voice. If anyone lives kind of close to us, we're located in Knoxville. You can make a meal for our survivors at our safe house. And if you don't live close by, we take Grubhub gift cards. And yes, we're at our 10-minute point. You can type in some questions in the chat box. Donate a gift card for us to buy some meals for our clients at our safe houses. And of course, signing up for training. So those are just ways you can build a relationship with us and figure out what else we need. We love any help. I appreciate any sort of help. We can go to the next slide. I should have got my water. So for example, this is one of our posts that we had, Human Trafficking Awareness Month. Again, please, I'm not seeing anyone follow me right now, and I have our account on here. I've not seen anyone follow me yet, so please give us a follow. Spread our posts. We have a lot of posts that we talk about commonly asked questions about trafficking, the work we do. We're about to do a talk about, we have a program that we'll be implementing in the spring called As You Are. And this is for women that are incarcerated, that were exploited. So we are doing new things this year. So give us a follow and give us a share. We can go to the next slide. So if we see something suspicious or fishy, or you're just not sure, these are numbers that we want you to save in your phone. The top number is for the Tbi Hotline, right? For our Tennessee folks. I think everyone's from Tennessee on this training. But that top number is for TBI. If we have any suspicion that a minor is being trafficked or in some situation, we do not have to have proof of force, fraud, or coercion. Okay, because minors cannot consent to sex. So you don't have to have proof of force, fraud, or coercion to make that report. The middle number is the National Human Trafficking Hotline. So if we have someone that's not from Tennessee and is from a different area and you call this number, they will connect you to the right resources in your area. So save that number. And the bottom number is for anyone that's in East Tennessee. So we serve from Chattanooga all the way to Bristol, Tennessee. If you know someone's in a situation that needs some sort of information, resources, give us a call. It's a 24-hour hotline. Okay. I'm just reading the chat box. For those that don't know, my name is Rana Zachariah. My contact information is my first name. It's spelled RANA at CCHT aht.org. You can head to our website, and my information is there as well. You can go to our about page, and you'll see my picture where my hair is straight and I look a lot better than right now. But give us a holler and a like and a share. You can sign up for our newsletters. Just so many ways to be part of this. I think that's the last slide. We might have one more that just has our website. Next slide. Oh, just kidding. I lied. I think you all know at this point who we are. We do trainings raising awareness about trafficking. We train primary responders. This includes law enforcement, medical professionals, social workers, foster parents, truck stop managers, anyone you could think of, we have a training for. We have two task force that meet up once a month in Knox County and in the Tri-Cities area. Folks from different areas, law enforcement, DA's office, other nonprofits, foster parents, all meeting for the same purpose, talking about challenging cases we have with kids. Is there a trafficker that's not been arrested that we need to throw in jail? And lastly, we have two safe houses. We have an emergency response center. We have a transitional safe house called Phoenix House. So these are both located in Knox County, and those specific shelters are for adults that identify as female. But again, we serve all individuals. So that is who we are. I think we have time for some questions. If we have any questions, Carlene, do you see anything? I must have put everyone to sleep after dinner. Well, guys, thank you again so much for giving me this opportunity and platform to talk to you guys about this really important topic. Um, I will leave my email with Carlene if you all have any questions. I will say that we have one request for our kiddos. Um, those squishy stress balls and the kinetic sand, we are in desperate need of those items for those kids. They use it as therapy whenever we have these visits with them and they're triggered, they have anxiety, they use these squishy toys as therapy. So we're in desperate need of coloring books, colored pencils, any sort of arts and crafts. So if you know that somebody that can donate that to us or send us a gift card, we would much appreciate it. Carly, I'm going to give you the mic, or if there's anything else that we can talk about, I'll stay here for the next couple of minutes. But I hope everyone has a wonderful evening and a safe weekend. And happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day, early day.